Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner with the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church. Welcome to our Public Affairs Forum. Our forums occur most Sundays at noon and are free and open to the public. For more information about our forum programming, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. Today, I'm very happy and honored to introduce Addie Broyles, who is the food editor and columnist with the Austin American Statesman. The title of her talk today is Tweeting Dinner with Ink-Stained Fingers, Confessions of a 21st Century Newspaper Food Writer. Not only is she in the paper, she has gone on to social media, and that's very exciting. She'll be telling you about that. But the Wednesday food section still remains, and I'm sure a lot of us tend to eagerly await that and pore over it. There's some great recipes in there. I can certainly recommend them. And she has worked with a variety of food bloggers and unconventional cookbook authors. She covers cookbooks, food trends, farmers markets, food entrepreneurs, and culinary culture, and somehow juggles all these activities, including the production of a community cookbook while raising her two young sons. She's originally from the Ozarks, and she's a graduate of one of the greatest journalism schools in the country, the University of Missouri School of Journalism. She loves to quilt and travel in her spare time. Let's give Addie Broyles a warm welcome. Thank you.
I might stand over here because I'm a little short, unless that's going to mess with the cameras. Thank you all for being here. It's a real pleasure to come and speak to your group. So I am a Missouri native. I actually have my parents visiting today. It's hard to miss my mom. She looks just like me, and my aunt and uncle. So I've been in Texas now for 11 years, and it's wonderful to be in this city that is changing so rapidly, and the community, the food culture here is changing at a breakneck speed. And I will say, oh, there we go. Oh, thank you. All 5'4". Oh, wow. This is. So I have been doing the food writing job since 2008, and many of you remember Kitty Kreider, who had done that job for 28 years. And that was, those were some pretty big shoes to fill. But I decided I was going to fill those shoes in my own way, and that has included quite a bit of social media and new reporting. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. But first I want to go back to my very first newspaper job. So I have been working at newspapers since I was 16 years old. I started out at my hometown paper, hometown of 7,000 people. The newspaper came out 3 days a week, and I was the student staff writer. So I wrote about sports, and I did business coverage, and I learned how to develop film. I caught the very end of the film era, and that's what kind of gave me the journalism bug. I went to the University of Missouri, explored photojournalism and magazines and television, and couldn't get away from newspapers, though. I worked at the student newspaper while I was up there, and then really loved, thanks to having some family members who live in Austin, including my aunt and uncle, also in present company, I moved down to Austin without a job. And this was in 2005, and I thought, well, I'll become a substitute teacher, or I will... Who knows what I'll do? I just wanted to live here. I loved the creative culture and the spirit of celebrating individualism. That was something that was really attractive to me. So came down here, applied for a copy editing job, and we copy edited, wrote headlines, cut lines. This is in 2006, 7, 8. This is a real turning point in journalism because the copy desk no longer exists at the Statesman, and I was lucky enough to transition from the copy editing job into the food writing job in 2008, and that's when I took over the column and started writing it on Wednesdays. So 2008 was a pretty big year. Not so little known fact about me is I was on a show called What Not to Wear that year. How many of you have seen that show? So I got a full-on makeover. Got sent up to New York City, and they threw away all my clothes and gave me a whole new wardrobe and shopping experience, and that was a life-changing week for sure. I learned how to treat myself the way I wanted people to treat me, which was a lesson that I hadn't learned or hadn't figured out or didn't want to believe. But while I was up there, I wrote a story about that experience. I was not yet a writer at the paper, but I wrote about what it was like to be on reality TV and the emotional strife that comes from people raiding your closet and throwing away your most beloved clothing possessions, and letting go of a lot of internal things, not just letting go of the clothes, but letting go of some ideologies that I had been holding on to. And while I was there, I was also shooting some videos of myself, selfie videos. I feel so ahead of the time to think about, now we have live streaming and all these other ways that we film ourselves talking with people. This was not very long after YouTube had even started. And so I was filming little videos of myself behind the scenes saying, we're on day 3 of shooting, and Clinton and Stacy, the hosts, are in the other room, and this is just what happened. And so I was kind of experimenting with new ways to tell stories and new ways to connect with readers. And I think that impressed my bosses at the Statesman, and they thought, even though I was young, I was a new mom, I was 24, 25 years old and had a 1-year-old, and I think they thought maybe this person could help usher in a new way of talking about food. And so that was in 2008, the year that Twitter exploded. I jumped on pretty early onto those social media platforms, and pretty quickly I realized that if I was going to have a food blog, I better connect with the other food bloggers in Austin and not just start my blog and pretend like I know everything there is to know about blogging. So here I am trying to learn how to do kitty justice, do the food section justice, do the Wednesday food section is a long-standing tradition that is beloved in communities. So I wanted to uphold that, but I also wanted to carve out a new space. And so that's where the food blogging came in. And I started a blog, and I started reaching out to the other bloggers in Austin. And this was a pretty controversial thing to do at that time, because bloggers were considered, and by many in the journalism profession today, considered to be the enemy, or the other, or the people who are going to take away our page views or take away our readers or somehow detract from what we're doing. And I decided that I didn't want to think that way. I wanted to not operate from a place of scarcity. I wanted to look at the audience of people who are interested in food as abundant, and how can I reach out to them and forge a network, forge friendships. At first it was just I want to have other bloggers, food bloggers in Austin that I know who I can just reach out to and feel like I have an online friendship with or kinship. But when we met, I pulled about 10 of us together. This was around the time that Julie and Julia came out, that movie about Julia Child and the food blogger who cooked from her book for a year. So food blogging, it was pretty popular at the time, and there were maybe 10 or 15 blogs that I found here, and we met and had a happy hour, and everybody just got along so well, and it was really, they didn't think about me as coming in trying to replicate what they were doing or steal any of their things either. And so really, that was kind of the beginning of a wonderful community here that has now blossomed into the Austin Food Blogger Alliance. And so that started officially in 2011. We launched as a nonprofit, the only nonprofit of its kind in the country. And our whole goal is to have an ethical standard for bloggers. That's one thing that I knew that I could bring with my journalism background is here's how you operate a blog in an ethical way if you didn't have journalism training, disclosure, all of those things. But also as an opportunity to provide educational and networking opportunities for bloggers so we can all learn how to take better pictures and learn all the coding things for WordPress that you need to know and learn how to write recipes. And it's really been a rewarding experience. So that was in 2011, and by 2013 we had published a community cookbook. So community cookbooks, as you know, how many of you have community cookbooks in your house right now? And they probably have plastic coil binds, right? So community cookbooks date back to the Civil War. And I had always thought that community cookbooks were, quaint and charming, but not exactly useful today, because I think a lot of their heyday was sort of in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And food tastes and ingredient availability has changed so much that we're not making dump casseroles as we were. We're cooking more with fresh ingredients. We're going to farmers markets. But sadly, community cookbooks are on the decline. And organizations like the Junior Leagues, they're actually not producing cookbooks anymore. And so as these stalwart organizations, the pioneers of the community cookbook space, started to publish fewer cookbooks, I thought, wouldn't it be neat if the Food Blogger Alliance, this high-tech digital organization, put together a print cookbook. So we started gathering recipes from the bloggers in 2012, and we worked with the History Press and published the Austin Food Blogger Alliance Cookbook, which is very much a community cookbook meant to be a snapshot of Austin in 2013. And people were asking me, well, should we have queso recipes? Should we have migas and all these barbecue and tacos and all the things you think about when you think about Austin food. And I said, no, I want the recipes that mean something to you, that you cook for your family or your friends or your neighbors. What are the recipes that are special to you? And because so many of us come from other places, Austin looks different than it did 20 or 30 or 50 years ago. And so I wanted the book to reflect that. So that was a super fun side project I did, and it made me think about community cookbooks in a new light too, because I was able to see community cookbooks as little treasure troves of information about a time and a place. And it also honored writers, essentially food writers who did not have a platform like the Austin American Statesman. And that's the thing that I love most about how technology has changed journalism, is that it allows people who are writers, or in the food blogging case, cooks, recipe writers, to express themselves and to share what they're learning, what they're exploring, share their creativity with an audience, even though they don't have the statesman behind them. And I think that democratization of creativity, of writing, is such an important thing. And I actually convinced my mom to start a blog. I was very proud of that, because she's a writer too. And so I do this all the time with people when they say, well, I want to get started in food writing. How do I do what you do? How do I get involved? How do I get a job in writing? And I tell them, start a blog. There are no barriers to entry if you want to be a photographer. You can be a photographer and you can share your photos with the world. You can be a writer. You can be a food stylist and have a blog around that. And that's how and I think the thing that I loved about that was the unexpected part of that was the community that came from that. So when everybody's in this space of vulnerability, to be frank, where you're sharing your stories and you're sharing something as intimate as food, the reciprocity when you find other people who are also doing that means you have an instant connection. So that's some of the new media stuff that I do, but let me tell you about some of the old media stuff that I do, because the newspaper has been in transition for a long time, but really intensely, I would say, in the past 10 years, where it really was the tipping point of just online, more and more people going online. But I still get the paper. I love getting the paper. I don't want to not have a paper. I have accepted the fact that one day there might not be a print newspaper, but that storytelling and journalism will remain. And so I'm just trying to do the best work that I can that meets both the digital needs and the print needs. But to be honest, the print part of it has become my favorite part of the job, even though we're just trying to maintain our subscriber base as it is. I love putting out the food section. It's like a mini food magazine every week that I get to oversee. I usually write 2 or 3 stories. Some of them are small little stories. Some of them are bigger stories. And they're always seasonal. And they're a reflection of what I'm interested in at whatever point in time. And that's a real gift from all anybody wants in a job is the freedom to be able to be creative and have a say over your workload. And I'm grateful for that opportunity. So when I'm making kombucha, like I am right now, that'll be a story that I write. Or if I'm really into peaches, or I'm making cupcakes, or this year we started a project called the Year of Baking, because I personally had fallen out of the habit of just baking for the sake of baking. It always had to be like a Christmas cookie, or I wasn't just baking brownies for my neighbors for the heck of it. So that has been really fun. But one thing that hasn't changed about the food section is that I get calls from readers all the time. And the relationship between the newspaper food writer in a city and the readers of that newspaper is something totally unexpected for me. I had no idea that people would call me and say, I'm in the middle of baking something. It's not working. Can you help me figure out what I did wrong? Or people calling because they don't have the internet. And I forgot to put an address in the paper. And they call and they say, I don't have the internet. Remember, I'm that reader who doesn't have the internet. Can you tell me that phone number or that address? And it's such a delight, though, because I'll get those phone calls. I'll get phone calls from PR people who are trying to get me to write about whatever they, are being paid to call me about. And then I'll get calls from readers who say, this recipe didn't turn out right, or this is how you screwed up, or how come you didn't include this? One of my favorite stories about screwing up recipes is I ran an apple pie recipe once that called for 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt in the pie crust, and the slash in the 1 and the 8 got removed somehow in the editing process, and I didn't catch it, and so it called for 18 teaspoons of salt, and a reader made it with 18 teaspoons of salt. And she called, and she was very upset, rightfully so. And I immediately, I was trying not to laugh too much at the situation, because this woman was calling me and was devastated because she had just spent all this time and all this money on this apple pie, and she was, expecting to serve it to guests, and now she couldn't do that. So that was a big lesson in paying extra close attention to recipes. And because, when I cook, I just kind of follow recipes. I don't follow recipes to a T. I tend to adapt them to my own tastes and what I have in the kitchen and all kinds of things. But there are readers who follow it absolutely to the T. And so learning how to write for all different kinds of readers has been interesting. Some people are, hardcore locavores who only shop at the farmers markets and don't see any value in shopping at, big box retailers or supermarkets or Costco, and they really want to keep food as local as possible, and they only eat meat that's sustainably raised. And what I try to do is also think about when I'm shopping at H-E-B, there are hundreds of other shoppers there. What do they need? What stories do they want to read? And when I first started out, I really was, and I say this with a great deal of respect, trying to mimic Edible Austin, because I think that they do a great job of that kind of coverage. But then every time I would go to the grocery store, I would feel guilty. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm not supporting my local food community, and this is not the highest and best expression of what food can be. But then I had this sense, I think I was in the produce section one day, and I'm shopping with people who are in my community and in my neighborhood, and who have all kinds of different economic backgrounds, different culinary backgrounds. They're feeding their kids, their parents, their community. It's not just, I feel like, it was a big lesson for me. I think we were reaching for green beans with this, older Hispanic woman, and I thought, why am I not writing for her too? And so I started consciously being more open-minded about food and not always having the knee-jerk rhetoric of, local is great. I love local, but there's nothing wrong with buying food that comes from California, or being realistic about the cost of meat. And if sustainable meat is not something that you can afford to if you run a preschool, you can't afford to buy grass-fed beef, sadly, because you need to keep your prices affordable for the families that you're serving. And so thinking about food in a more holistic way that was not so limiting was really refreshing to me. And so now I can think about, Walmart, when they first started selling organic yogurt, that changed the yogurt industry, because suddenly organic yogurt producers could have an outlet, big scale outlet for their product, and they could ramp up their production, and it also means that organic yogurt is now available to millions of more consumers than 10 years ago. And that's a remarkable shift. And so I have tried to get away from the big is bad mentality, be more open-minded about that. I still try to be critical of factory farming and, what happens when Walmart pushes out the small-tail resellers in small towns like my own. But now we're seeing the pendulum swing the other way, where Walmarts are closing because people can't afford to live there and the wages. And so food is surprisingly complex, as you might imagine, and I try to cover it with sometimes with a lighthearted approach, where I'm just, let's see, what am I doing next week? What am I doing next week? I know on the 15th. I know what I'm working on this week. What I'm working on this week is a package of summer recipes for the 15th. And that is just, it's summer. Let's celebrate with light, fresh, summery flavors. But then there are times when I'm writing about, the inequities in the food system, and how wages, how farmers can't afford to get investment from banks, small-scale farmers, because banks don't want to give them loans. There was a really interesting story that came out last year where an organic chicken farm had partnered up with a startup in Austin that had tons of investment, and tons of capital, because they're trying to sell frozen paleo meals. So paleo is one of the new diets, the caveman diet, where you eat all this meat. And they did not have a source. They could not get enough organic chicken. They had a lot of tech money. They have a lot of tech money, a lot of tech expertise. They had, they couldn't keep their frozen meals in stock because they were selling so quickly. And then on the flip side of that is this organic farm that's just trying to stay open because they're trying to peddle organic chicken at the farmers markets, and they didn't have any large-scale wholesale clients. And so when they got together, it was a perfect match, right? And so sometimes I write about that kind of stuff. I'll write about Soylent. Have you ever heard of Soylent? Soylent Green is made of people. There's actually a product called Soylent, which is not made of people. What's fascinating about that is that comes out of Silicon Valley. And so just backtrack, Soylent sort of represents a the science of food and how non-traditional food companies are pushing the boundaries of not just what is food, but how we make food. So in Silicon Valley, we're seeing meat alternatives like Hampton Creek. They've developed an egg, vegan egg substitute that you can make cookie dough and mayonnaise, and they're going to revolutionize the egg industry because they can make this egg that has a much lower, carbon footprint than eggs. You don't have to have the cages and all that stuff. But that kind of innovation wouldn't have come out of Chicago or Minneapolis. These, previous food hubs where General Mills and Kraft are still, ruling the roost, to be honest. When you walk around the grocery store and you see 100,000 products, most of them come from 2 or 3 big companies, and they were the gatekeepers previously of food innovation. And now we're seeing people from Silicon Valley, avant-garde food companies who are coming in to disrupt that space. And Soylent is a really great example of that because it's a liquid. It's kind of like Ensure, but just marketed differently, because you can live on it. I mean, they have done all this science about. I mean, I don't know who would want to live on it, but for people for whom food is not a high priority, I get that. I'm not here to tell you that food needs to be, your whole world has to revolve around what you eat. I think that that's a little bit of a fallacy too. And that sometimes you're just hungry and you're at your desk and you're working, and maybe if you drink your lunch, that'll give you more time to go shopping and do something more enjoyable later. So I actually wrote this big column about how Soylent, you would expect a food writer to snub her nose at Soylent and think, this is going to kill everything that's joyful about food, because it tastes like a joy kill. But there's a purpose for that. I think that there's a market for it, and I think that there's also some probably humanitarian work that could be done with having, Soylent available in places where food access is limited. So I'm interested in all kinds of stuff like that. Let's see. I think I promised that I was going to talk about ink stained. Well, just the fact that I can't seem to give up the print section. Everybody, we're shifting more and more into this breakneck speed of publishing. So my food blog, all the blogs at the Statesman are just, we're expected to just churn out content there and try to get all these page views. And if any of you have spent any amount of time on Facebook, you know what kind of stuff gets clicks, because we are clicking on certain things and not clicking on other things. And so, but I also know that people are clipping recipes from the paper. So they're calling me and telling me that they're clipping recipes from the paper. And so in some ways I feel like I have a really unique place at the paper because of that. People have relationships with their recipe clippings. That's a very, very specific example of this. But they also feel like they have a relationship with me because I invite them into my kitchen and I write about things that are going on in my life. And sometimes those are difficult things to write about. Last year I wrote about getting divorced and what that transition into a co-parenting family looked like, and how food, we'd get together for family dinners as our new family. And even though the family was different, all 4 of us would still get together. And so writing about that stuff, I got more response out of that column than many others I had written. And sure, it had a recipe, but people didn't really care about the recipe. What they were telling me about was, I remember doing that, or I wish I would have done that, or my daughter's going through that same thing, I'm going to give this column to her. And that's where my job, that's where the real rewards start coming in, because, we're talking about food, yes, we're talking about recipes, but we're talking about something different, more meaningful. And so I'm always trying to tap into that. I guess let me talk about some food trends that I see. People always ask me what I see going on. And I think delivery, we can't talk about food without talking about delivery at this point. How many of you have had, there's 2 questions. How many of you have had groceries delivered to your house? There's something like Instacart. Okay, how many of you have had, oh, you have in the back. Okay, how many of you have had food delivered to your house that is not like pizza or Chinese, where you have used something like Favor or Postmates or Uber Eats? You have, yeah. So that's kind of becoming a big deal too. And, just the delivery economy is ramping up. We now have Amazon, Google. Google just launched a delivery service in Austin, Instacart. And, Favor is actually based here now, and they're in 11 cities, and they deliver anything from anywhere for $5. Yeah, it's not sustainable. To be honest, it's not a sustainable business model. You can't, from the people I talk to who know about food delivery, it's $6 is the minimum that it costs to get food to somebody's house, whether it's hot food or it's groceries. But we are seeing people value their time. This is why meal kits have come in. How many of you have ordered a Blue Apron or a Plated or something like that? That's the idea that you would get prepared ingredients delivered to your house. If you open up this box that has all this ice, it's not very sustainable, speaking of our environmental concerns a minute ago, to get food shipped from a warehouse in Kentucky to your house, then you still have the pleasure of cooking yourself, mind you, for $10 a serving. I mean, none of that makes sense when I'm looking at my own grocery budget, but for many people that's working out because people are valuing their time and that they are willing to pay somebody like Instacart an extra $15 even on your grocery bill just so that you don't have to go to the grocery store and do the shopping. I will never be that person because I love grocery shopping. It's one of the highlights of my week. My children love grocery shopping. They get mad at me if I go without them. I feel like I think they think they're the kings of RHEB because the way they walk around there. Anyway, but I'm really interested in this idea of convenience versus cost and how much we are willing to sacrifice in terms of quality. I mean, I think that all of those companies, the meal kit companies are serving very high quality food. But that people are willing to pay for that convenience is a real shift because, you would think that when people are trying, especially, I mean, the economy is better than it was, but as people are trying to watch their budget and make sure they're, reining in their spending, you didn't really have an option. Like, you had to cook. And now there are all these other ways that you can both cook or buy restaurant food or get your groceries. And so, I'm a millennial, and so I'm seeing a lot of my peers doing this. And so part of me worries a little bit that they're going to shift so much into this convenience economy that they're going to forget the joys of grocery shopping or forget how to grocery shop or forget how to meal plan. Not that I'm a meal planner myself, but just thinking, well, what could I make today? If you fall into the habit of having other people tell you what you're going to make, you lose the ability to generate that spark of creativity yourself. So that's what I try to do with the food section is just encourage people to, get outside of their comfort zone, try new ingredients. It's very much a reflection of where I am, and I'm just an everyday cook. And so since I'm an everyday cook, I feel like I can write about my little triumphs and my failures in the kitchen, and hopefully that is something that resonates with my readers. So it's a little bit early, but I wouldn't mind going ahead and taking a few questions because I feel like usually there's some really good ones.
Thanks for inviting us into your can-do kitchen.
Sure.
So my partner and I are very concerned about water in California and products that are made with the water in California because we understand that fracking water has been allowed to be used in agriculture. Mm-hmm. And I'm concerned that I'd like you to comment on that, but I'm concerned that this is a trend of using spoiled or toxic materials in food.
Well, I think also just using water that people are going to need to drink. You think about, yes, we're in an El Niño situation right now here, but and I think California is getting some rain, but there's going to be a real shift in population and I think agriculture out of California in the next decade because of this very reason. And I think that I haven't actually read too much or heard very much about contaminated water from fracking being used in agriculture. I'm not surprised at all, and I think fracking is a big deal even close to home because you're seeing the earthquakes and things that are happening. And so I think it's good for us to be looking at all of the consequences of something like fracking. And I think that it is really hard to know what goes into your food unless you grow it yourself. And I think that's one of the virtues of local food is that you can talk with your local farmers. I mean, I also have tried to grow watermelons and wasted probably a swimming pool's worth of water to get the crappiest watermelon you've ever had. I will not be growing watermelons anymore, sadly. And so I think that there's a real interesting balance between, yes, we want to know what's in our food. We want to know about GMOs. We want to know who has picked our food. I mean, you read about slave labor, the shrimping issue that came up last year, the tomatoes in Florida. It's really hard to walk through the grocery store without, what I try to do is encourage people to walk through the grocery store and think about every fingerprint that's on that food. Was it just? I love the mission of this church. It's really special. Was this food harvested justly? Was it, to the earth, to the workers, to all those things? Yes, what kinds of chemicals are in there? To be honest, water is a chemical. Water, chemicals are everywhere, and even organic farmers use chemicals. It's a misnomer that you don't hear very much about. And so it's very rarely black or white. And so I don't know for sure if what fracking water does to vegetables and if that comes into you and if what are the consequences if you're eating that. But you do have to take a step back and think about the whole picture, and then you start thinking about meat. I'm a meat eater, but I'm very aware that it takes a lot of water and land to raise meat. And so that just has to be part of my conscience when I'm eating it. And I think that helps me waste less food. I think food waste is a huge issue that we don't talk enough about. We buy too much food. I think places like Costco sadly encourage that because you buy these large quantities. And also the cheaper food gets, the less you value it. And, I'm looking for deals and on a budget like everybody else, but I do think that we probably should pay more for food than we do because there's not enough money to be made, and wages are a big deal. The food industry right now is in turmoil because there aren't enough kitchen workers because the wages aren't high enough, and then if you go into the restaurant and suddenly your prices are 20% higher because the owner had to pay the kitchen staff more. It becomes sticker shock for everybody. So it would have to be a slow transition into us paying more for what we get. But with the proliferation of food media, not just traditional media, but I'm fascinated with all these online-only websites that are publishing really amazing investigations. There's, I know Mother Jones has a magazine, but a lot of the great food work that they do is just online. So because we have all this access to information, we can read all these stories about subjects that we previously had never even thought about. So that is a really good question, though. It speaks to the ethics of eating. It seems to get harder, doesn't it? Every day we're finding out new nutrition information, and you're thinking, oh, I'm not supposed to eat fat. Oh, I am supposed to eat fat. I am supposed to eat meat. Oh, wait, I'm not. I'm milk. Am I meant to drink milk? You read Forks Over Knives. I don't know if you guys saw that movie. You like that? Yeah, about not eating dairy. And it makes you question, well, gosh, dairy is such a staple of American culture, and why is that? And you have to look at lobbying, you have to look at marketing, you have to look at the ag groups that have a lot to do with how we talk about nutrition in this company is not based on what the nutritionists say, it's based on what the ag companies are saying. And that makes it hard to trust information. So,
my question is, kind of the general topic is cooking your own food in restaurants. And the example, about 10 years ago, I was in the Netherlands, and it was a work dinner, and we showed up at this restaurant, and they gave us a menu in Dutch and a big pile of ingredients. Well, here's your dinner. Start working on it. And it was kind of an interesting exercise. A bunch of people from different countries trying to work together to get a dinner out of it. Have you ever heard of that sort of thing in the U.S., and do you think there's any future for it in the U.S.?
Oh, yes. I think we're going to see that a lot. I just saw a DIY coffee place down in Australia where they give you milk, water, espresso in 3 little cups, and then you mix it to your liking. But I have to give a shout-out to Mom and Pop Broyles. When we lived in Florida as a small child, these guys, there's a restaurant. Oh, what's it called? What's the restaurant, though? The Mill House? The Grist Mill? So it's in Ponce de Leon Springs, and there's a griddle in the middle of the table where you make your own pancakes and bacon and eggs. And this has been around for 30 years and years and years. So this, I think that they've probably been one of the stalwarts, the longest standing restaurants where you cook your own food. And there's like a 3-hour wait on Saturday. So obviously people are excited about the pleasure of cooking their own breakfast in that place. There is a line, obviously, and I don't think that that's going to take off in a way. Because I think enough people are going to say, well, wait a second, why am I just doing this at home? Why am I coming in here to pay you for the pleasure of it? But I do think we are eager for non-traditional food experiences. And when I say we, I don't just mean millennials. I think that all of us are thinking more expansively about what it means to eat food. And that's why we have supper clubs and pop-ups. And, for a while there was the trend where you would go and cook a bunch of food in a commercial kitchen and then have it frozen so that you could put it, there was a place up in Round Rock that did that. Now there's Snap Kitchen and My Fit Foods and then the meal kit places. So there's two companies in town. One is called Cilantro Lime, and the other one is Gourmet by Numbers. Like it's a local meal kit company, and so you can order those meals, have all the ingredients delivered. A Farmhouse Delivery is a food delivery company that they started doing meal kits. And their model is that they want you to take your bushel, like your CSA bushel, and give you sauces and proteins and marinades that are already prepared to help you eat your CSA bushel, which I think is, community-supported agriculture is a really excellent way to both support local farmers and have a regular source of fresh, interesting produce that you wouldn't usually buy in the store. Kind of going off on a tangent about CSAs, but CSAs allow you to tell a farm ahead of time that you want to buy 10 boxes of produce over the course of 6 months, And you don't pick what's in those boxes. They just give you whatever is being harvested. And so then you're forced to try kohlrabi and fennel and turnips and things that you would never eat before. But so yeah, I mean, I think that we're going to see all kinds of new ways to cook and eat food. And I think that is, it just speaks to people wanting experiences and being curious about what is there out there besides just sitting down at a restaurant and being served by a waiter and cooking your food at home. Those are maybe two ends of a spectrum, and we're going to see businesses open up every little piece along the way. Just like how there's farm camps, if you can send your kids to a farm camp, which must make people who are farming kids in the 50, 60, 100 years ago in the Midwest laugh their heads off that you're going to pay the farm for the privilege of sending your kids to the farm to learn how to farm. Or, I got to tell my chicken. I had chickens for a while, and my grandma, who lived here, she had chickens when she was growing up. And I remember telling her that I was having chickens, and she looked at me like, why would you do that? They're dirty, and they squawk, and you can just go buy eggs. Don't you know you can just go buy eggs at the store? And so I try to keep that stuff in mind a lot, that everything that we think is novel, somebody else is going to think is ridiculous, and vice versa. And so, never to be too sure of yourself. That's one takeaway from here.
I'm wondering, the near future, where do you see your creativity taking you?
Oh, that's a great question. Where is my I think about that a lot, actually, because I love being creative in food. I love my work. But I started quilting actually because I needed a hobby that was not on the computer and had nothing to do with food. And so I have a side blog called The Feminist Kitchen, which started out as a place to write about women in food, and now I write about, I'm kind of on this ancestry quest to learn more about my heritage, and I've written about quilting, and I've written about, just arts and traveling, and, traveling alone as a woman to Mexico City. That was one of my posts I did last year because people were asking me, well, you're by yourself? They just couldn't understand how I would travel by myself or why I would travel by myself. And so writing, that's been a huge creative outlet to do something like that. I'd like to write a book about co-parenting because my ex-husband and I are doing a really wonderful job raising our kids. We have split custody, and I feel very strongly that our society doesn't support 50-50 custody. We have a child support system set up in place where usually fathers are paying for the privilege of not parenting their kids, and I don't think that should be the starting line. I think we should start at 50-50 and then negotiate from there. And there's also a way to do it with love and honor and respect. So I feel obviously I have a lot to say about that, and I think that would be helpful for other people who've gone through that. I would like to build a deck on my house with my help of my uncle, who's a really good carpenter. So I like, Laura Ingalls Wilder was my favorite author as a kid because of, homesteading and pioneering. And so I'd like to do more things like that. It's great that I have a food writing job that's very stable and steady, and I can continue to grow in that. But I definitely, it's nice to not be too confined to just being the food writer. I get to write about all kinds of things with the Statesman. One story I'm working on right now is about the music memory contest. How many of you have had experience with that? Where your kids went to school, they memorized by hearing, not by playing, classical music, and not just classical music, but some contemporary jazz and like West Side Story. So my son did it this year, and I found out that the woman who runs the program, the roots of the program actually date back. It's been 100 years this year since music memory contest first started. And I was able to witness this transformation happen in my own son, where he went from thinking that classical music was kind of boring and just all the same, and as a passive listener, to by participating in this contest where he actually got to go and sit and hear an orchestra play 20-second snippets of these songs that he had been listening to over and over again in his music class, to be able to listen closely enough to identify and know the composer and the title. And here was, thousands of AISD students are participating in this, and it has, this woman revived it in the early 80s. And so I'm going to write this, I think it'll be a beautiful story about 4 generations of music lovers who have kept this music memory contest alive, and now she runs a company that's national. And so she's selling curriculum and music memory CDs to thousands of schools all over the country, and it's all based out of here. So I love writing, that has nothing to do with food, but I love it, so I get to write about it.
You mentioned kids just now, and as a retired teacher, I can tell you that if we don't work with children, we won't have a future. Mm-hmm. And I was one of the founding members of the Environmental Stewardship Committee at AISD, and now we have school gardens in almost every school, and maybe every school, and they're composting all of their food waste. And by exposing children not only to the growing process, but connecting them more with nature and getting them outside, all these things have incredibly positive effects on their learning and their connection with the earth, and especially when the things that they grow appear in their cafeterias. So I don't know if you write about that kind of stuff, but it seems like this, with our green school movement, this is a great way. A lot of people I talk to have never heard of this. They don't even know that this is happening unless you have children in that school that are participating. So could you comment on getting kids involved with growing food?
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. I hear a couple of different perspectives on school gardens. Some people who are in the school gardening movement say, yeah, and now every single school in Austin has a weed garden because, it starts with good intentions where you have you've got lots of input and stakeholders are involved, and then after a couple of years, maybe that teacher who spearheaded it moves on, and it can be hard to maintain it over the long haul. But I think the schools themselves, the administrators, are having more buy-in. It's not so much of an individual teacher effort. And I think there are a lot of rewards to be gained from doing the, just what you said, so having them be involved in watching the plant grow. I mean, a lot of kids, I was just talking to somebody who works at Johnson's Backyard Garden on Friday, and they're doing a big push to have farm fresh food in schools. So every Friday for the last 3 or 4 months of school, Johnson's Backyard Garden worked with AISD to serve these roasted carrots at every school. And so, and they were in the schools for some of these lunches, and they would ask kids, well, what is he would have a carrot that was fresh out of the ground, and kids would say, that's not a carrot. Carrots are the little nubs that you get in a bag, and so he, and then he was, it's like kids who couldn't identify an eggplant or a pepper, or, we really take for granted education about food, and I think that it becomes a pretty clear have and have not situation, and so I think that if we're going to make a big push, to have gardens in schools and have that kind of curriculum, to have it as wide as possible is, because I think sometimes we might be teaching kids who don't necessarily need that information. Or not need that information, but they already know that kind of stuff because they're trying out for MasterChef Junior next year and know how to souffle. Those are not the kids that need this kind of education. I think that what I would like to see is just as part of the, just like you have PE and music and art, that maybe if there were a food part of that, I would love. I think that home ec should be a required course, just like shop should be a required course. I think, we fail our kids in not teaching them self-sufficiency in schools. Nutrition, well, because doctors don't even get nutrition. I mean, it's, and so I think that we treat family sciences as, how they call it now, or I love home economics, like home economy. Think about that. There's an economy of home, of running a home, that everybody needs to know about, not just women, for the love of everything. Everybody needs to learn how to cook. Everybody needs to know how to wield a hammer. Everybody needs to know the basics of car repair. And I think that we're not doing students justice if we don't teach all of that. And I think food is a really important part of that, and food obviously is life, but there are many other elements that we need to teach kids, and food is part of that holistic education.
Hi there. I had the pleasure of working with Addie for several years at the American Statesman. You, as much as anybody, you seem to always have one foot in the blogging and social media world and the print world, and some reporters, they kind of had to drag kicking and screaming to start a blog and that kind of thing. How do you balance that, and how do those worlds interact for you?
Just when I think I get it, and I find my balance and my zen between, previously you had deadlines once a week. So the Wednesday food section had a deadline the week before, and that was the only deadline you were meeting. Then blogging came in, and you had a daily deadline, and now with social media, you have an hourly deadline. I mean, you're expected to be creating content all day long. And those of you who create content or just do creative work know that you can't create content 8 hours a day. There's consuming of content, there's creative content. Those are two very different things. And you have to have time for contemplation. You can't always be pushing. One thing that I've really learned about just the way the world works today is that we need a two-way communication, and that's why I love social media so much, is I can talk directly with readers, and I get phone calls. This kind of stuff. That's why I wanted to have more Q&A, because I love hearing from you guys. That really helps me as much as it's cathartic to be able to ask the questions. But it's hard because we're increasing. There's a lot of pressure to get page views. There's a lot of pressure to do video. And if it takes me 3 hours to edit a little video on my phone, and I really needed to spend that time working on a recipe or working on something else, like, you have to think about your return on your investment. So I think about ROI, to use the buzzword, a lot. And I know sometimes I think, you know what, I could get a lot of page views if I just spent 15 minutes blogging this thing. And so I'll just stop what I'm doing, which I don't like because I like to try to be focused and do one thing and finish the task, but then I drop that, do the blog thing, and then try to go back to the long, thoughtful music memory contest piece, which obviously I'm very excited about writing, but that will not get the kind of page views that, Aaron Franklin wins the James Beard Award. We live in a very clicky, people really like restaurant stuff. What I've learned is that people really like restaurant news online. We all look for recipes online, but, my recipe stories don't do as well online as even just the day-to-day openings and closings of restaurants. So what I'm trying to do is figure out other ways to engage, take the print food section and how do I make that more relevant online? Because it's all about efficiency and how do I get the most out of every single word that I type? How do I make sure that goes to as many people as possible and is relevant to those specific demographics? Because the demographics are a little different in each of those spaces. So I wish I had really figured it out. I think little baby steps.
Addie, thank you once again for being with us today. And I have two questions. One, I don't think you've explicitly addressed this. That is, have you taken a personal stance on GMOs? And secondly, how in such a relatively short period of time have we in Austin gone from $2.49 hamburgers at Sandy's to $8.99 hamburgers everywhere in town?
That's a great question. All right, Hopdoddy and affordability is essentially that question. Okay, so GMOs, I used to be pretty, a hardline anti-GMOer because that's what, good liberal, almost activist hippies in college do. I'm glad this will be broadcast, so that'll be on the public record. But because I have tried to be open-minded about these things, I actually have had the opportunity to interact with some Monsanto people and go to some conferences and hear from farmers of all different stripes. The local farmers who loathe everything that has to do with GMO, the activists on that side of things who make a really compelling case that we shouldn't be modifying our foods, and especially when it comes to the ownership of those seeds, that's where it becomes even more problematic to me than what is it doing to our bodies or what is it doing to the soil. And I think what I'm learning is that there is actually a pretty strong case to be made for GMOs that I think we need to at least be open to hearing, because I think that it can reduce the water use. I think it can reduce the amount of pesticides that we use. I think you think about an organic farm where you're trying to grow produce without any input, without any herbicide or pesticide. You're, just using conventional organic methods, I should say. That might not be the most efficient way to grow food. But I think that there are pitfalls of GMOs that obviously the pro-GMO people are not going to address, and so I think that it is a duty of the anti-GMO people, or just the skeptics, or the people in the middle who are trying, like me, who are trying to really suss out the truth from both sides to say, well, what about this? What about the ownership issue? What about the fact that the Monsanto seeds only work with the Monsanto pesticides, and that this is all just a way for you to make more money? But you talk to farmers, and especially in the Midwest, who are growing the majority of our food and food that's being exported overseas. And if you were to suddenly take away GMO crops from the supply chain, you wouldn't want to see what kind of a world that would look like, because it would lead to riots and wars and some really terrible things. And so, but that doesn't mean that they get a free pass to do whatever they want either. So I think, but I also am, I know that I eat GMOs because GMOs are in practically everything. And I think that what I'd like to see is a little bit more science, neutral money being spent on science to help us figure out what the real implications are for your health. Because I think right now the science says that it doesn't negatively affect your health. But, we still have more to look into that. So affordability, let me answer that really quickly. The $2 hamburgers. I mean, Austin, think about rent. Just rent alone. Affordability here is a huge issue. I think that we really need to think, I know you all are thinking a lot about just things like traffic and affordability and how that changes our culture and how everything we love about Austin, is vulnerable right now. Because if the musicians and artists who made this city great can't afford to live here, what happens to the heart of the city? And so I think there are still, Sandy's is still there, thank goodness. I would say keep patronizing the places you want to see exist. and don't patronize the places that don't, because they, you know, the $12 hamburgers, you have to look at that and say, well, is it grass-fed beef? Is it local tomatoes? Is it, you know, really well-made bread? And if you're going to get a super, super high-quality product, that you might have to pay for it. And so, but that doesn't mean you're going to eat that hamburger every single day. You know, I actually really like that we have both of those options. I wouldn't want to see all Sandy's, and I wouldn't want to, you know, all $3 hamburgers. I wouldn't want to see all $12 hamburgers. I like having the option. But to be honest, rent, you know, the cost of land and running a business in Austin is what will eventually close a place like that, which is sad. But
we have a question from your mother, Sis Ann Broyles.
Well, I think that we've all been enjoying this talk, and it's kind of serious and interesting, all of the things that I had in my mind that you all are asking, and I'm learning so much. But I would like for Addie to share one humorous, almost embarrassing, fun story.
Do you have one in mind, Mom?
Oh, no, I got so many of them. I just what pops in your mind that would be really entertaining for everybody to hear about your experiences with food, holidays abroad, Easter.
Oh, you mean the time I tried to grill a
baskets.
turkey? Okay, I'll tell the grilled turkey story.
It's just really
That's
funny.
a good one. Okay, I tried to grill a turkey when I was in Spain. I lived a year abroad when I was in college, and it was the best year of my life. Please encourage young people that you know to go live abroad when they can in school, because I learned more during that year than I learned the rest of the time, including that it's hard to find turkeys in foreign countries. We did find a turkey, but our apartment did not have an oven, because a lot of places don't have ovens in other places. And so we thought, well, we'll grill a turkey. All right, we can do this. We can spatchcock it, or I don't know, we'll smoke it. I don't know. We thought we could take on the world and we could do anything. So sure enough, we borrow a grill from a friend. This is in Alicante, Spain, in an apartment of 7 women. There are 3 Americans and 4 Spanish women, and the 3 Americans, we thought we were going to make a Thanksgiving dinner for our roommates. And so we borrowed a grill from a friend. Turns out the grill didn't have a lid. And so we thought, man, what are we going to do? Darn it. Let's, I know, we have a laundry basket. Let's take the laundry basket and line it with foil. That'll work, right? It'll trap the heat, trap the smoke. It'll be great. We have a picture of my roommates and I standing around the grill with the foil-lined laundry basket on top, and about 2 minutes later, the thing goes up in flames. Right next to, the gas for the hot water. We were, on our little balcony thing. I mean, we were 2 feet away from blowing up the building. And that was my first experience trying to cook a turkey on my own. I will not try that again. We ended up having to, cut the meat off of the bird and, saute it in a pan. It was the saddest Thanksgiving you've ever seen. Let's see, I'm trying to think what else. Well, there have been plenty of times where I've, made cookies and forgotten the sugar, or making muffins and forgetting the baking soda. Obviously, there's a reason why I'm doing a year of baking, because I need to become a better baker. But I was also just thinking about my first meal that I made. Do you remember when I made you guys, Chelsea and I made white rice and Schwann's frozen chicken breasts that we microwaved. I think we microwaved the whole dinner. And I was probably 10 years old, and it was right around the time I think I had my first cup of coffee, and then proceeded to stay up all night because I couldn't go to sleep. You don't remember that? Obviously, it was a memorable meal.
We have about 5 minutes or slightly less left. I'd like to ask a question. Recently, I heard on National Public Radio that I believe it's the restaurant and the Museum of Modern Art is eliminating tipping, and the idea is to just have all of the waiters and the cooks and the people doing preparation on salary, or at least hourly. Mm-hmm. And their questions are, will people still come and eat if the price is higher? Or how will that affect attitudes? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, can I poll you guys? What do you guys think about no tipping? You're into the idea, and so you feel like you would be willing to pay more? I think that the cultural shift, well, and so that's what's interesting, is that our culture here is just based around tipping, and that we have this expectation when you go that it changes the whole dynamic between the server and the diner, because there's a performance aspect, I'm trying to earn a good tip from you, so I'm giving you exemplary service. And when you're dining out in Europe, it's not the same. people they're there for a salary. They get the same amount of money no matter what kind of service they give. And I think that is actually going to be the harder shift to make, because we're just so used to this little dance that happens when you go out to eat. And I like the idea of removing tipping and making it more equitable for everybody, because that's a big issue. And imagine if you were working in a restaurant, slaving away in the back of the kitchen, doing not very glamorous work, making $11 an hour, and knowing that the people who are putting the plate of your hard work on the tables are walking out of there with $25 an hour. That's not going to feel very good. And I think that creates tension in the front of house and back of house. But I think for restaurants, it's going to be I'm glad that we're seeing some people experiment. I mean, that's what it takes, is just real courage and bravery to try something new. So Danny Meyer, who is doing that in New York, I think should really be commended for being one of the first people to try that model. Locally, Thai Fresh is a restaurant that's doing that down on Mary Street in South Austin. And she says it's doing really well. Jam is the owner of that restaurant, and she said that it was bumpy at first, but now people are, they accept the price of the food. It's maybe a 15 or 20% more. I mean, it really does all shake out to be the same, but there's a power difference when you write in that tip versus when you're just charged for it. So I think we're going to see more of that, though, and that is certainly a big trend that will be happening. And and also, like on restaurant menus, the labeling of nutrition. That's something that is difficult for restaurants to keep up with, because every time you make food, it's a little different, and that's actually one of the reasons why we don't run nutritional information with our recipes. It's a question I get quite often. It's expensive to get that nutritional, the assessment. You have to send it off to a nutritionist, and they analyze it and they send it back. But also, when you cook, I have a heavy hand with butter, for instance, or when you actually put food on the plate and you put a portion out, your scoop is going to be different than mine. And so what I try to do is have people think about food in a holistic way, that it's not, we're not counting calories and counting fat grams. We're thinking about, having a diverse source, lots of different, types of food on the plate and different types of nutrients, and not eating the same thing every day. And just mainly portion control. Don't eat near as much as your plate. My plates at home are this big, because that's the amount of food that me and my boys need. I don't really use the big plates. So
we want to thank you so much. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah. And it's great to know that she responds to phone calls, emails.
Please reach out. And my email address is just abroyles@statesman.com.